Addison from San Francisco is looking to create a meatless Monday using his favorite bolognese sauce. What can he do with that?
Well, Ragù Bolognese is a meat sauce, but I think we can leverage the savory flavor and the texture of mushrooms and come out with a vegetarian version of bolognese that might just turn meatless Monday into mushroom Monday. I've got the ingredients all laid out here. Ragù Bolognese is a meat ragu, and typically they use at least 2 different kinds of meat. I have 2 different kinds of mushrooms. I've got portobellos and creminis. I took the gills off the portobellos because I didn't want my sauce to come out dark and murky looking. Instead, I wanted it nice and bright. And we're going to saute these. Typically, a Ragù Bolognese would start with pancetta in the pan. I'm going to take a really flavorful olive oil, and in goes the mushrooms. And we're going to start to saute them. Now, mushrooms are easily 80 or 90% water. So I know that as the water leaves these mushrooms, they're going to shrink, and that's why I left some larger pieces in here. Once I'm confident that the mushrooms are just beginning to brown and the pan has recovered its heat, I'm going to introduce onions and carrots, and then finally a little bit of celery. And I want to continue to cook this. If at any point it looks a little bit dry, you can introduce just a tad more olive oil. So the mushrooms have started to brown and the onions are translucent. I don't want to put too much more color on that, but there's some of the flavor of the mushrooms that's building up on the bottom of the pan. And I'm going to deglaze that with some white wine. What this does is it takes all of the flavor that's beginning to collect on the pan and it frees it from the pan so that it won't burn. And now I want to allow this to reduce. I'm going to bring it down almost dry. So Bart, if you take a look at this, the wine has evaporated almost completely. There's no excess moisture. The next flavor that I'm going to layer into this pan is tomato paste. And I want to cook it just briefly. I want to take that bright red color and turn it a little bit brickish red. It won't take very long, but it makes a huge difference in the flavor. It goes from tasting raw and sort of obviously sweet to having a fuller, more complex flavor. And the next step in the traditional recipe would be to add chicken stock. But what I have here is a mushroom stock made from the mushroom stems and some vegetable trim. And so I'm going to add mushroom stock. Here is the outside of a piece of Parmesan cheese. This ordinarily would end up in the garbage. This is the rind of the Parmesan cheese. What I'm here to tell you is there's a tremendous amount of flavor in that. So that goes into the pan. You don't have to worry about it. It won't fall apart. It won't melt. It will just lend wonderful flavor. I have some herbs, some parsley stems, thyme, a bay leaf, and I just tied it all up in a little bundle with a piece of leek around it, just so that I can dip it out later on. If this were made with meat, meat has a lot of gelatin that gives body to a dish. The mushrooms, not so much. So I'm going to take just a little bit of potato and I'm going to grate it into this. And what that'll do is it'll give me just enough starch to bind this. And it really doesn't take very much. I think I put maybe a tablespoon or so. The last step, and this surprises people when you're talking about a meat dish, is to add cream. This is very traditional with Ragù Bolognese, and it's going to be traditional in ours as well. The final step is to allow this to simmer. Now, if this were meat, braising the meat for a long time so it gets tender would be appropriate. The mushrooms are tender already. I would say start to finish, if I wasn't yapping so much, we could finish this sauce in half an hour, easily. While it simmers, we can do some seasoning. Salt and pepper are certainly called for, but nutmeg oftentimes shows up into sauces that have cream. So nutmeg makes its way in there, pepper as well, and salt. But remember that piece of Parmesan. That may lend a little bit more salt to this dish, so just be careful. I'm going to take this and move it aside because I have one that has been simmered already. You can have a little look-see at the consistency. It's pretty thick. It's chunky with mushrooms. Now the sauce should be thick enough to coat the pasta and rich enough so that this really feels like a meal. But I think you'll discover that with all the mushrooms we've added to this dish, it is plenty savory up front, even without any meat. Ragu bolognese, but appropriate for a mushroom Monday.